At dawn on August 10th, 1792, the bells began to ring. Not once, not twice. They did not stop. Across Paris, the sound spread through narrow streets and over rooftops. It was not a call to prayer. It was not a celebration. It was a warning. Inside the Tuileries Palace, the royal family awoke to that sound. Marie Antoinette did not ask what it meant. She already knew. For months, the city had been changing. Voices had grown louder. Faces in the crowd had grown harder. The air itself felt different, heavy with anger that no longer tried to hide. Now it had come to her door. Outside, thousands were gathering. National Guardsmen, armed citizens, men who once bowed their heads in respect now stood with weapons in their hands. They moved closer, step by step, filling the courtyards, pressing against the gates. They were no longer subjects. They were something else. Inside the palace, doors were shut. Barricades were raised. Servants moved quickly, but quietly. No one spoke more than needed. Every sound felt too loud in the growing tension. Marie Antoinette stood still for a moment. Just 3 years earlier, she had walked these halls as Queen of France. Every step had been watched. Every gesture admired or judged. She had lived surrounded by gold, silk, and ceremony. Now, those same walls felt different. Too quiet, too fragile. The palace had become a prison long before this morning. It had begun in June 1791. The escape. They had tried to leave Paris in secret. A slow journey. Disguises. A plan built on hope. But hope had not been enough. They were recognized. Stopped. Brought back under watch. After that, nothing was the same. Trust broke. Not slowly. Not gently. Completely. The people did not forgive. They did not forget. Pamphlets spread through the city. Caricatures passed from hand to hand. Her name was no longer spoken with respect. It was twisted, mocked, reduced. Madame Deficit. A symbol of waste, of betrayal, of everything that had gone wrong. Her Austrian birth became another weapon against her. To many, she was never truly French. Now, she was seen as something worse, a foreign threat inside the heart of the nation. And this morning, all of that anger had taken shape. It stood outside her gates. The royal guards held their positions. Swiss soldiers, trained and loyal, stood ready. Their uniforms were clean. Their lines were steady. They waited for orders that did not come. Because the king hesitated. Louis XVI did not give the command to fire. Time slipped away in silence. Then, a decision. Not to fight. To leave. Marie Antoinette followed as the royal family moved through the palace gardens. The path was exposed. Open. Every step carried risk. Eyes watched from every direction. They walked toward the Legislative Assembly, hoping for protection. Behind them, the palace remained. Empty. Unprotected. Vulnerable. It did not take long. The crowd surged forward. Gates broke. Barriers fell. The sound of bells was replaced by something louder. Shouting, gunfire, chaos. Inside the palace, violence spread quickly. The guards fought. Many died where they stood. The rooms that once held music and ceremony were filled with smoke and blood. By the end of the day, it was over. The palace had fallen. The monarchy, though not yet ended, had lost its ground. And Marie Antoinette, once the most powerful woman in France, no longer had a home to return to. That morning had not just been an attack. It had been a beginning, the beginning of her fall. Stay with us till the end for valuable insights. Like, subscribe, and share to support the channel. They did not call her queen anymore. Not in public. Not in records. Not even in whispers. After the fall of the Tuileries, The royal family was no longer treated as rulers. They were placed under guard and taken to a medieval fortress in Paris. The temple. Its walls were thick. Its towers were old. It had once been a place of power. Now, it was a place of waiting. Waiting for decisions. Waiting for judgment. Waiting for the end. At first, the family remained together. That small mercy did not last. On the night of August 2nd, 1793, footsteps echoed through the corridors. Slow, deliberate, final. Officials entered without ceremony. There was no explanation offered beyond a simple order. Marie Antoinette was to be moved. Immediately. No time to prepare. No chance to argue. She understood what it meant. Transfers like this were not routine. They marked a change. A step closer to something irreversible. Her daughter, Madame Royal, was there. The moment passed quickly, but not quietly. Marie Antoinette moved toward her. There were no long speeches. No dramatic words. That would have been dangerous. Every sound in that place could be heard, recorded, repeated. So she said nothing. She embraced her daughter. Tightly. Briefly. As if holding on could stop what was coming next. It could not. She stepped away. And that was the last time they saw each other. Before dawn, she was escorted through the sleeping city. No crowd followed. No voices called out. Paris was silent, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that comes before something ends. Her destination was the Conciergerie, a prison known by another name. The antechamber of the guillotine. People who entered rarely came out. The building stood on the Isle de la Cite, surrounded by water and stone. It was not designed for comfort. It was designed for holding, and for breaking. When she arrived, there was no ceremony, no recognition of who she had been, only a process, a registry, a name. They did not write Queen of France. They wrote something else. Widow Capet. It was deliberate, carefully chosen, cold in its meaning. It erased everything. Her title, her history, her identity. Even the word widow was premature. The king was still alive at that time. But that did not matter. The name was not meant to be accurate. It was meant to reduce her, to make her smaller. Inside the prison, she was placed in a narrow cell. Stone walls, iron bars, a single small opening that allowed in limited light. The air was damp. The space was tight. There was no bed, only straw. The conditions were not hidden. They were known. Cold floors, unclean surfaces. Insects and rats moved freely in the darkness. This was not neglect. It was intention. A few days later, an official order was issued. She was to be kept under constant watch. Not outside her cell. Inside it, 2 guards remained with her at all times. They did not turn away. Not when she moved. Not when she tried to rest. Not even when she attempted to change her clothes. Privacy no longer existed. Not even in the smallest form. Her world had been reduced to a single room, always observed, always controlled. Her health began to fail. The signs appeared slowly, then all at once. Extreme weakness, weight loss, bleeding that did not stop. A prison doctor was allowed limited access, but treatment was minimal. Observation mattered more than care. By late September, her appearance had changed. Noticeably, her hair, once styled with care, had turned completely white. Her face had thinned. Her posture remained straight, but it required effort now. Everything required effort. Still, she did not fully surrender. At one point, she attempted something small. A letter, hidden, carefully written, meant for her sister-in-law, Madame Elizabeth. It was never delivered. Intercepted. Read. stored as evidence. In it, she wrote only a few words. "I have nothing left to hope for in this world." The sentence was simple, but it carried the weight of everything that had been taken from her. By then, she was no longer waiting for rescue, only for what would come next. And in the Conciergerie, what came next was always the same. The trial began before it started, long before she entered the room, long before the charges were read. The decision had already been made. On the morning of October 14th, 1793, Marie Antoinette was taken from her cell in the Conciergerie and led into the main hall of the Revolutionary Tribunal. The room was full, not with neutral observers, not with curious citizens, but with selected faces, people who had come to see an ending. Armed guards stood along the walls. Their presence was not subtle. It was a reminder of control, of power, of what would happen if order broke. At the center stood the accused. She wore a plain black dress. A white bonnet covered her hair. There was no jewelry, no symbol of status, nothing that connected her to what she had once been. Only the name remained, and even that had been changed. The charges were read aloud, slowly, clearly. Treason, conspiracy, collusion with foreign powers. Each word carried weight, but none of them were unexpected. These accusations had been circulating for months. They had been repeated in pamphlets, speeches, and rumors. But then came another charge. Different, more personal, more damaging. She was accused of committing incest with her own son. The courtroom did not react immediately, but the air changed. Even among those who opposed her, this accusation was extreme. It was not just political. It was designed to destroy something deeper. Her dignity, her image as a mother. The claim had come from statements attributed to her young son, taken while he was imprisoned and isolated. The conditions under which those statements were made were not discussed in the courtroom. They did not need to be. The accusation had already served its purpose. It had been heard. It had been repeated. Now, it was being recorded as fact. The prosecutor spoke with confidence. His tone did not rise. He did not need it to. The structure of the trial was already in his favor. Witnesses were limited. Evidence was selective. Much of it came from documents seized after the fall of the Tuileries. Letters, notes, fragments of communication, pieces taken out of context, presented as proof. One particular discovery was mentioned, the hidden safe found within the palace. Its contents were described as evidence of secret dealings, but the details remained unclear, ambiguous. That did not slow the proceedings. Marie Antoinette stood still as the accusations continued. When asked about her contact with foreign powers, she denied involvement in military actions. Her voice was steady, controlled. She did not raise it. She did not plead. Then the question returned to the most severe accusation, the one meant to break her. There was a pause, a moment where the room seemed to wait. Her response was short. "I appeal to all mothers." Nothing more. No argument. No defense. Just that. For a brief second, the courtroom fell silent. It was not sympathy, but hesitation. Even those who had come to condemn her did not press further on that point. The line had been spoken. It could not be easily dismissed. But silence did not change the outcome. The trial continued. Testimonies were given. Most repeated what had already been said. Rumors were presented as truth. Interpretations replaced facts. There was little effort to challenge them. She was not given the time or the tools to defend herself fully. There were no strong witnesses called in her favor. No extended arguments allowed. The process moved quickly, deliberately. After 2 days, it ended. The jury returned with a unanimous decision. Guilty, The sentence was clear: death by guillotine. The verdict was read in the early hours of October 16th, around 4 a.m. The timing was not accidental. It allowed little space between judgment and execution. No delay, no reconsideration. When the sentence was announced, she did not react. No visible shock, no visible fear. She had reached the point where the outcome no longer surprised her. There was only one path left, and it was already set. She was given a few hours, not to escape, not to argue, only to prepare. Outside, Paris remained awake, waiting. The verdict was given at 4 a.m. By that time, the city was quiet, not asleep, just quiet. The kind of silence that follows a decision no one plans to change. Inside the Conciergerie, nothing paused. Orders moved quickly. Papers were signed. Guards were instructed. Every step followed a routine that had already been used many times before. For Marie Antoinette, the hours ahead were limited, not counted in days, not even in full daylight, only in moments. She was taken back to her cell. The same narrow space, the same cold walls, the same watchful eyes that never turned away. Nothing had changed, except the meaning of everything. Before, the cell had been a place of waiting. Now, it was a place of ending. She was informed of what would happen next. There was no ceremony in the words, no attempt to soften them. Execution. That same day, in the morning, she listened without interruption. There were no questions. There was nothing left to ask. A priest was offered to her, as was the custom. She refused. The decision was noted, not challenged. It did not matter enough to delay anything. Time moved forward, slowly, but without stopping. At some point, she was allowed to sit. The straw beneath her had not been changed. The air remained heavy. The guards remained inside, watching every movement. Even now, privacy was denied. Even now, she was not alone. Her body showed signs of strain. The illness that had weakened her in the previous weeks had not disappeared. It had only settled deeper. But she remained upright, not out of strength alone, out of habit. For years, she had been observed, judged, studied. Every gesture carried meaning. That discipline did not leave her now. Even here, even at the end, she was given a plain white garment. Simple, unadorned. Nothing like the clothing she once wore. No fabric of status. No color of rank. Just white. Her hands were bound behind her back. The rope was tight. Functional. No effort was made to make it comfortable. The act was not symbolic. It was practical. A prisoner was being prepared, not a queen. Somewhere beyond the walls, the city had begun to stir. Movement returned to the streets. Doors opened. Voices rose. News had spread. It always did. By sunrise, people would gather. They would not come to protest. They would come to watch. Inside the prison, the final preparations continued. Her hair, already turned white, was cut shorter. Not for appearance, for efficiency. The blade of the guillotine required a clear path. Even this detail followed a routine. Every step had been done before, many times. There was no urgency in the movements of those around her. No visible emotion. This was work. Structured. Repeated. She was just one more name on a list that had grown long. Very long. As the morning approached, the air inside the cell did not change. It remained still, unmoving. Whatever thoughts passed through her mind were not spoken. There were no witnesses to her private reflections. No record of final fears or regrets. Only actions were observed and recorded. When the time came, the door opened. Not suddenly, but with purpose. She was told to stand. She did, without resistance. The guards moved into position. The routine was clear. It had no room for delay. Outside, the sound of the city had grown louder. The silence was gone. What replaced it was expectation. She stepped forward, out of the cell, into the corridor, and toward the end that had been set hours before. The steps were narrow, wooden, worn, built for repetition. She began to climb, slowly, not because she resisted, but because each step required care. The guards stayed close, not touching unless needed. Their presence was enough. Above, the platform waited, open to the sky, open to the crowd. There was no barrier now, no walls, no doors, nothing left between her and the end. As she reached the top, the executioner stood ready. Henri Sanson. His role was known, his actions practiced. He had done this before, many times, enough to remove hesitation from the process. Still, this moment was different. Not for him, for those watching. Marie Antoinette stepped forward. There was no speech prepared, no final address to the crowd, no attempt to change what had already been decided. That time had passed. She moved toward the center of the platform. The space around her felt larger than it was, emptier, as if everything unnecessary had already been removed. Only the essentials remained: the blade, the frame, the silence that began to spread. In that final movement, something small happened. She stepped on the executioner's foot. It was not forceful, not intentional, just a misstep. For a brief second, the motion paused. She turned slightly and spoke. "Pardon me, sir. I did not do it on purpose." The words were simple, polite, out of place. They did not belong to the moment, yet they remained within it. They were the last words she would speak. After that, nothing more. She was guided into position. The routine continued. Her hands, already bound, did not move. Her body was placed where it needed to be. The mechanism above remained still, waiting. The executioner completed the final adjustments. There was no countdown, no signal to the crowd, only emotion. Quick, practiced, final. At 12:15 p.m., the blade fell. The sound was sharp, then gone. For a moment, the crowd reacted. Voices rose. "Vive la République!" The cry spread outward, repeated, louder each time. But not everyone joined. Some stood silent, watching, as the body was moved, as the process concluded. The moment itself did not last long. It never did. What remained came after. Her body was placed into a plain coffin. No markings, no symbols, no recognition of what she had once been. She was taken away, not to a royal burial, not to a place of honor, but to a common grave, the Cimetière de la Madeleine. There, she was buried among many others who had met the same end during that period. No name marked the ground. No sign remained above it. For years, that is how it stayed. Unnoticed, unidentified, forgotten by place, but not by history. It was only in 1815, long after the events had passed, that her remains were located and moved, transferred to the Basilica of Saint Denis, a resting place for kings and queens, a return that came too late to change anything. By then, the world she had known no longer existed. The system that had placed her on a throne had already been destroyed, piece by piece. The fall had not been sudden. It had been built, through anger, through fear, through decisions that could not be undone. Her death was not just the end of a person. It marked the collapse of something larger, an order that had stood for generations, removed in a matter of years. replaced by something new, something uncertain. Revolutions begin with ideas, but they do not end there. They move forward, they consume, they reshape, and sometimes they leave behind silence where voices once held power. In her final hours, there were no speeches, no attempts to explain, only actions, only moments, and one sentence that remained: "I forgive all my enemies." A line written before the end, not spoken on the scaffold, but carried forward, as everything else fell away. If you enjoy dark untold history, subscribe because we uncover what others won't.